But let's say we want to control the flow of our program and say that if this happens, then do this. Otherwise, do this. That decision-making process of which line of code needs to run is known as control flow, right? And we can write programs so that they can perform various tasks. And if a certain task doesn't happen, then something else happens. And if we run into some kind of an error, then do this. And hopefully you get the idea. So let's go over an example of this. So the way we deal with control flow is through conditions, okay? And we talked a little bit about conditions earlier when we were talking about comparison operators. When you need to compare one thing with the other, you're essentially forming a condition. So let's go over an example. If I write a statement like if, now this is a keyword, notice it, the text editor highlighted this. If 5 is less than 6, then print, yes, 5 is less than 6. Now this will always run, right? If I run this, it's of course always going to print 5 is less than 6. Keep running this. This line of code will always run. Now if I have an else here, because if else is used to run the alternative. So in case 5 is not less than 6, what should be done? And so I can say, in this situation, this will never be printed. Okay, so this particular line of code will never, ever be printed based on this given condition. So what is the condition? This is the condition. We're using a comparison operator in the middle where we do 5 is less than 6. Now 5 is of course always going to be less than 6. So this condition will always evaluate to true. And so this line will always be printed and this will never be printed as the code currently lies. All right. So you might as well, you can have a straight if statement where you say true. If true, print this will always be printed. All right, and you can keep running this, it's always going to be printed. And I can have an else here and say this will never be printed. So right off the bat, the interpreter knows that, hey, we've got a condition that's true. So this is always going to be true. This is always going to run. This is unreachable code. Hover your mouse over here. This code is unreachable. This will never be run. Now, what some people do is surround their conditions with parentheses. And I like that approach personally. I like to separate various comparisons using the parentheses. So I can very well wrap this in a parenthesis and this code will work exactly the same way. When we have a condition where we can say elephant is greater than hippo, and we can have another, for example, expression where we have an and clause, and we inside of parentheses can say 3 is greater than 2. Now we've got two expressions here. Now together, this is going to evaluate to either true or false. And so with the order of operations, we've got parentheses. These parentheses are going to be evaluated first. So 3 is in fact greater than 2. So this is true. But then elephant is less than hippo. This is also true with the current values that have been assigned. So the overall value of this is going to be true. And so in this case, we'll say this line is printed. Now, since we're learning here, I'm keeping things very simple, and we're just, printing this line is printed, and this will never be printed. This is obviously, we're going to get into more comprehensive examples where we get into more advanced coding, but for now, that's what I've been typing, right? So don't worry if this is too basic or too advanced. You're going to catch up regardless of where you are. But let me make this a bit easier to understand. Instead of saying this line is printed, I could just say that the if statement evaluated to true, just to be more specific. And we can say if statement evaluated to false. Okay, that's probably a bit more specific and easier to understand when you run the code. Now again, we've got these parentheses, and for simple conditions, when you have just one or two conditions, you don't really need these parentheses. But if you have a really long set of criteria or conditions that you're checking, it's probably helpful to wrap those conditions in parentheses like this. But in our example, if I just leave elephant is less than hippo, and let's just do that. We don't need the parentheses, okay? And this is easier to read. Now understand, in each of these if statement or else statement, we can have further lines of instructions, right? In the else clause, we can have comments, we can have other if statements and else statements, we can have loops, and all types of coding structures that we're going to get into later. So if I was to, for example, add another if statement inside of this if, and say that 5 is less than 7, for example, right? This is another condition inside of this if statement, and then we're going to print, 5 is less than 7, okay? Now in this case, if I run this, notice it's going to print this first part, the if statement of values are true, and then it's also going to print 5 is less than 7. But if I was to change this around and say that elephant is greater than hippo, then this evaluation, this will evaluate to false, wouldn't it? So do you think any of the top portions are going to run? Of course it's not, right? This if statement will not even be run. All of these lines of code will be skipped, okay? The interpreter is not even going to go through this code. The interpreter is going to see if this evaluates to true. If it doesn't, it's going to jump. It's going to skip all these lines and jump to the else clause. Okay? And so that's how control flow works. You skip lines. The interpreter is going to skip lines that don't need to be evaluated. And later on, we're going to get into loops, which means running a line of code or an instruction over and over and over again. All right, so that's how you control the flow of the program. We're going to continue to build on this decision-making if-else statements. There's also something called elif to provide further alternatives. And so we're going to look at that in the next lesson. So let me wrap it up here. Practice with this concept, change the values around, create your own variables, and play around with nesting your own if-else statements and so on. And by the way, we have this if clause. We can also, of course, have an else clause. Okay? And this would be printed. And it could be anything. Now again, the interpreter is smart enough to know that since 5 is less than 7, this will never be printed. That's why it's highlighting this. But understand that as part of this if statement, all of this code right here falls under the umbrella of this condition right here. Elephant is greater than hippo. And this falls under the umbrella of this condition. So hopefully you're beginning to see the different layers of if-else statements we can have. Now this could be, you can have 10 or 15 different layers of nested if-else statements, and that's that would be a very poor design. Typically, I don't like to go in too much with nesting if-else statements. If I need to go to level 3, meaning you have an if inside of an if inside of an if, that's complicated enough, okay? I don't even like that. 2 layers is good enough. But if you start to pass 3 or 4 layers of nesting, chances are you're writing really bad code, and you want to try to avoid that and reorganize and refactor your code so that you don't have this kind of nesting of conditions happening, okay? So we'll start by defining a variable called animal. Let's say that we have a cow, all right? Now I can have if statements, so let's define an if statement. We can say if the animal is equal to cow. So now this is a comparison operator, the equality operator. This is not using less than or greater than. We've talked about this operator before. So this is to check if both things are equal. So if animal's equal to cow, then we'll say that it prints, we can say that it eats grass. Now what if the animal is something else? We can have a variety of animals. So I'm going to have another condition, and that's used with elif. Not else, but elif. All right, this is a new keyword that I'm introducing to you in this lecture. And in this case, I can present another alternative and say, hey, if animal is equal to bird, then do this. And we can say that the bird eats, it eats seeds. And then we can yet again have another alternative. We could say elif animal, if the animal is a monkey, make sure to surround that with quotes, is a monkey, then we can say that it eats bananas, right? Eats bananas. And then finally, towards the end, we can say else, and this is the final condition. Else, we can say that we don't know what the animal eats, meaning the animal that the user may have assigned to this animal variable does not have any conditions, and so in that case, the end-all be-all print statement will be run. All right. So let's run this, and of course it's going to say eats grass. The cow eats grass. If I say monkey, it's going to say that it eats bananas. Whoops, I think I misspelled monkey. I actually typed money. That's not good. So let's change that to monkey. And so now if we run this, notice it says eats bananas. All right. And then you saw that if I was to give something here that does not exist in any of these conditions, it's going to print this, right? So let's say if we chose alligator and we run, we don't have a section for alligator, so of course it's going to say we don't know what the animal eats. Now the text editor is smart enough to know that we made a spelling mistake here. That's why it's underlining that alligator has two L's, but that's besides the point. Now just like in the if statement, we can have multiple conditions. We can have multiple conditions in each of these elif blocks as well. So we can say if the animal is a monkey or the animal is a ape. If the animal is an ape or a monkey, it eats bananas. So if we were to choose ape now, then this condition will also be met, eats bananas. If we type either monkey or ape, it's going to eat bananas.